A theory of mind. The human invention of a faculty called the mind, metaphysical successor to soul, created by metaphorically repurposing verbs into nouns as related to function and use of our concept know, demonstrated in Terminator 2: Judgment Day. In James Cameron's pop sci-fi thriller Terminator 2: Judgment Day, Cameron explores the question of a possible litmus test for humanity by way of analogy to a mechanical, humanoid AI combat program from the future which, being played by a human actor, Schwarzenegger, is supposed to, for all intents and purposes, be so identically human that its non-humanity only becomes apparent when the Terminator's fleshy faux skin is damaged and his robot core revealed. As far as analogies for philosophical thought experiments go, this one is fairly apt. Essentially, we have a man-made being which cannot be physically distinguished easily from other men, and is programmed in such a way as to act human. How would we ever be able to tell? And if we could not, then what would be the fundamental classification difference between this being and a real human being? The film offers a Turing test of sorts, wherein it operates as a method of inquiry in artificial intelligence for determining whether or not a computer is capable of thinking like a human being, at least sufficiently mirroring. This film frames its Turing test around the comedically affable experience of a Terminator coming-of-age story, wherein his initial robotic strangeness, his coolness, his machine-like nature, his dry delivery and behavior eventually warm up, become charming. He adopts 80s/90s Californian slang, becomes less serious, and ultimately ends up employing humor, language, and concepts in just such a way as a human would. This tracking of the growth and development of an AI being, its learning as it becomes more human, a popular science-based Frankensteinian cinematic trope of our time, reaches its zenith in this film during two exchanges related to the practice of crying. The first, in an early scene, John Connor, the protagonist, describes his mother to the Terminator, speaking of her emotional state that, "I see her crying sometimes," to which the Terminator inquires, "Why do you cry?" Curiosity. John replies, "It's when there's nothing wrong with you, but you hurt anyways. You get it?" To which the Terminator responds, emphatically, "No." He claims not to get why people cry. So in position 1, the Terminator does not know why humans cry. Later, during the film's emotional conclusion, John Connor, in an act of desperation to save the Terminator, who, for Connor, embodies the role of his missing father, having become a parent figure/guardian to him, from his mission to destroy Skynet, himself included, Connor experiences an emotional outburst and repeatedly cries, "I order you not to go." To which the Terminator replies, "I know now why you cry." This scene marks a major transition from the one previous, as Schwarzenegger seems to have learned something, a very human process, wherein he previously did not get it, crying, but now claims to know why humans engage in such a behavior. Learning, educating, developing, growing, all of this because he claims to know now the implicit value of his knowing, of his being able to know from a previous state of not knowing, the virtue which this film espouses. The AI truly has become human. Position 2, the Terminator does know why humans cry. So, the crux of philosophical questions surrounding this film, the emotional gravity of the penultimate scene, the nature of the movie's questions regarding the Terminator's status as pertains to human/non-human being, implicitly relates that the possibility of knowing, of gaining know, from a position of original ignorance, is arguably the metric by which beings are evaluated as human, at least in the terms of the film. With this experiential knowledge, Schwarzenegger now completes the second implicit fundamental values judgment pertaining to the film's representation of a cultural meterstick for humanity, the ability to interpret emotion, i.e. to intuit another's feelings, which requires an initial database of one's own experiences with which to compare, i.e. to possess a theory of mind. It is this scene, this quote, "I know now why you cry," which transmutes Schwarzenegger from robot to human. He can now learn and intuit emotions thus a theory of mind, as if it were having a mind, thinking, knowing, gaining knowledge, which made one human. The argument is subtle, but operates like this. The final scene offers a value judgment, wherein knowing, possessing a mind, is presented as the metric by which conscious human beings are separated from non-conscious non-humans, so that the Terminator can know was physically able from a state of not knowing to enter a state of knowing is to demonstrate his achievement of humanity. So if growing, learning, knowing, as in knowing why someone cries, is significant, is what makes human, we should perhaps be incredibly careful and skeptical of this categorical determiner, this meter stick assessment of humanity, this knowing business, this mind business. Do I really know why you cry? What does it mean for one to utter such a proposition? If we are so convinced that successful employment of language, including the term know, as in the Terminator, as in a Turing test, is what makes human, then since functional use of language seems intimately related to our determiner of humanity, perhaps we should scrutinize very deeply the use of this word know, the term mind, what it says about language, and what that in turn says about human beings. What is the relationship between knowing, thinking, minds, mental states, and what we consider to be human? So let us begin, as all great philosophical texts, with a bold, brash, generalized, unproven claim, which I will then prove. All language exists only as metaphor. This is a major problem for academic endeavors, including the sciences, but especially for philosophy. So, for instance, it is common among modern academics to believe in such a thing as a mental state, such as the state of hope or the quality of having a mind. Yet we forget when, historically, these noun terms deceptively jump the metaphorical shark etymologically from their origin as verb terms to their modern usage today as concept nouns. This should both bewilder and alarm us. Hope, etymologically, derives from its connection with hop, as in to leap in expectation, so the verb, to hop, is magically transmuted by way of metaphor into a noun, to hope, and we suddenly are capable of envisioning the human creation of a mental state, to hope, out of the physical state, to hop. As well, mind enters the common vernacular by way of the verb to mind, as in to watch, to look at, so mind the children, as in look at the children, wherein subsequently the very act of looking at something becomes metaphorically conceptualized as a distinct faculty or process which one has or possesses, i.e., their mind, a mind. So, would you mind the children, where mind operates grammatically as a verb, becomes what is on your mind, where mind operates grammatically as a noun. This transmutation of verbs to nouns, the most sneaky and devious product of all human metaphor, is the foundation for all metaphysics, a trap for all academia, and a terminus for the possibility and potential of knowledge, such as, I know now why you cry. The most humorous, bewitching example of the metaphorical utility of language is found in the common use of the word think. What do we do in philosophical inquiry? Simple. We think with our minds until we know something. Well, since we've already done away with the origin of minds, what do we make of this whole thinking and knowing business? It should come as no surprise, or perhaps great surprise, that think as a verb is subject to the same conjugation arrangements as chew, as in chew, chewed, chewing, just so in think, thought, thinking. The same with know, as in know, knew, knowing. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the act of thinking and knowing are as verbs, like chewing. We think like we chew. We know like we chew. They are actions that I do, not some default process, but an action which I activate. This seems at odds with our common sense notion that, unlike chewing, I seem always to be thinking, to be knowing, at any given time, all that I know. I seem always to be on. I am more of a process than an act, unlike chewing, which has a definitive origin and cessation. When have I begun thinking? When have I finished knowing? How exactly language manages to produce this mirage existence of conceptual states, such as thinking, knowing, the mind, essentially akin to the metaphysical souls, this process should have one in awe. Puzzled by the nature of this spectacle, the origin of metaphysics, knowledge, knowing, as based on an untenable language-bound metaphysics. Language, as great mystery of the natural world in plain sight, is a monument at which we no longer marvel. So little so that when a robot from the year 2029 claims to know something, it is by this very metaphysic, this utterance, that we judge him as human, imbue him with a soul, as it were. Now, much is revealed by way of examining the first half of the Terminator's reply to John Connor, which exposes a cultural metaphysics of reason, knowing, as Turing test for conscious being, which imbues minds, thinking, with humanity. I think, therefore I am, this era's metaphysical credo. However, it is perhaps the second half of Schwarzenegger's utterance which should attract most of our attention. The Terminator's full reply is, I know now why you cry, but it's something I can never do. How can the Terminator know, and by extension, all humans, cry, if it is something he cannot do himself? I am reminded of an essay by Thomas Nagel, What is it like to be a bat? For a Terminator to know why humans cry would be like for me to know what it is like to be a bat. Crying releases stress hormones. A Terminator would have no such need, as if I could proclaim, echolocation, I can relate. Oh, it's like my eyesight in how they navigate. Even though I will never possess first-hand experience of this faculty, what could I claim to know about it exactly? The film raises a larger issue, though, which is what it reveals for implicit ground-level foundation, as implicit values are always best. One can easily judge a society by what they take for granted, the backdrop which is no longer questioned. In our era of reason, the metaphysics of Athens, the film, in its entire line of questioning whether or not a robot could ever know what it is like to be a human, is quietly constructed atop the fundamental assumption underlying this premise, which is whether or not a human can ever know what it is like to be another human. For even if the Terminator were human, to say he knows how John Connor feels is to implicitly intuit a theory of mind, i.e., you have a mind, and I can know what is on it, or what it feels like from within my mind. Terminator 2, Judgment Day, demonstrates this implicit assumption, common in our day and age, of theory of mind, that there are minds, that others have these minds, and that I can access, in some part, what it is like in your mind, by way of metaphor, from the experiences I have gathered being only me, as if a robot had access to the experiential qualities of a human being, as if a human being had access to the experiential qualities of another human, as if you had access to the experiential qualities of a bat, as if any being had access to any other being. All are the same. Robot has no more access to human than human does to human, than bat does to human, than any being has to any other being. The other is inaccessible. The problem of solipsism is real and permanent. Plato's cave, from which there is no escape, the light of the cave wall being the light of life, all life being reflected only through the glare and hue of your own window panes of perception, is a permanent fixture, an ever-present reality. AI simply presents another layer to the inaccessibility problem. In order to question whether a robot can know what it is like to be a human, we have first made the assumption that a human can know what it is like to be another human, i.e., that theory of mind, the metaphysical product of reason and language, were a reality which is mistaken. One will never possess first-hand experience of anyone or anything else's reality. Solipsism is real, permanent, firm, true. Humans don't have minds as a state. Remember, it is a verb, not a noun. But the fact that employment of terms such as this, bearing metaphysical properties, have been evolutionarily selected for, implies the significance that we believed we did. Just as souls were not real, It was biologically advantageous to employ the use of the term soul as a human tool, just the same with mind. Think, no, the mind is simply our new gateway to the Platonic realm, a new tool, a new metaphysic, which is profitable to humans in the way we organize and arrange ourselves socially. Now, understanding that language is constructed purely of metaphor, I wish to close my investigation on robots knowing human experience, on humans knowing human experience, on humans knowing bad experience, the metaphysical tricks required to produce our modern equivalent of the soul in language, the similarly natured theory of mind and its related terms, knowing, thinking, mental states, and by proxy, its relatedness to our supposed humanity, with two brief quotes. For the oracle doesn't speak, they signify. Good creatures, do you love your lives, and have you ears for sense? Here is a knife like other knives that cost me 18 pence. I need but stick it in my heart, and down will come the sky, and earth's foundations will depart, and all you folk will die.